my name is Yuliia and welcome to Multicultural's Community Hour. In this segment, we are talking about civic issues in Winnipeg, Manitoba. I want you to meet Alexandra Shkandrij. She is a curator of exhibits in Ukrainian Cultural and Educational Center of Seredok. Hello, Alexandra. Thank you so much for being here with us today. I'm so happy to see you.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for having me here.
And the main topic we are going to discuss today is the importance of art during the war. And I will start from the key question: what is the meaning of art during the war and why it is so important to keep art alive at the time?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think that's something that every single person who works in the cultural sphere and who isn't directly involved in the front lines, they have to confront that question and they have to come up with an answer. But I think to a question like that, Churchill said it best when he, during the Second World War, was asked to cut funding to the arts and cultural sector. What he said was, if we don't have culture, what are we fighting for? And I think that people at Seredok, we've thought about this, we've talked about this internally, and one of the things that's come up for us is that it, first of all, it's a uniting force for people. Ukrainians are incredibly diverse. The people in Ukraine, like even you and I, like I'm a third generation here in Canada, Ukrainian. You've more recently arrived, like a newcomer Ukrainian. But we're united by the arts, the culture, the food, the music, like all of these things bring us together, and it brings together more than just you and I, it brings together the people from, all sorts of different groups who find themselves in Ukraine, who come from all over the world for all sorts of reasons, who have, really deep roots or, more recently arrived. And for me, arts and culture are so important because they're able to do that for Ukrainians. And in this effort in particular, you have so many people who have to be involved, who have to help Ukraine, and to bring them together, that's the arts and the cultural sphere.
What brought you to the cultural, and why did you decide to link your life with the Ukrainian culture?
I think for a lot of people that question's really rooted deeply in identity, like how do people define themselves? And one of the nice things about being a Canadian is the Canadian experience allows you to really have a cultural identity that, is separate from being Canadian, but also like makes you more Canadian as a part of it. And I think for me, being Ukrainian has been so helpful. It's helped me to define myself, to really understand myself, but it's also linked me to other people. Ukrainian people in particular, they've been so warm, they've been so helpful to me. They helped my family when they first came over, and now I have the opportunity to help others through my work at Seredok and in other parts of the Ukrainian cultural sphere, so that's been really lovely. But also to Canadians, because so many other Canadians have a cultural identity, and we understand each other through this, right? Like we may not necessarily have the same food or the same style of dress or whatever that's sort of like traditional or cultural, but people understand that so intimately and so deeply, and that's been really lovely to be able to relate on that level with other people.
What is happening in Ukrainian art right now? What changes has Ukrainian art undergone since the beginning of the full-scale war?
So a lot of people have responded really differently. Like you've seen the people also, maybe you've seen the TikToks about people talking about how they responded to the war, the beginning of the war. There are those who've become super productive. There's those who have sort of frozen up and felt like this wasn't a good outlet for them. But I think in general, people have really thrown themselves into their work, right? I've talked to a lot of journalists, I've talked to a lot of people who, have felt, like artists have felt for the first time that really every day getting up, being creative, being a force for something like generative for Ukraine, it matters so much. It is life and death for these people, right? And I think for a lot of people, they've had that, that desire, that drive to do something, to express and to channel the experience through their work, or to bring other people who might not be in the creative sphere something like visual, tangible, something, create something for other people to experience, to enjoy, whether it's a distraction, whether it's a tool for communication. For example, at Osredok, we do have our new exhibition. Part of it is for, Ukrainian audiences. It's educational, it's sort of like an entertainment portion, but we also have stuff for a more Canadian audience, and that's to show people a little bit about the war, right? Doesn't have like an entertainment value, I wouldn't say, but it does have an educational one where you're trying to communicate something to other people. So I think when you look at how people have responded to the war, it's been very different, but it has been like a really creative time for a lot of Ukrainians.
Yeah, let's talk about the last exhibition, immersive exhibition Osredok represent a couple months ago. The exhibition had unbelievable success. What do you think is the main reason why it has this huge success? Did you expect so much attention to this exhibition?
Yeah, this immersive exhibition that we have going on, like I mentioned, has two components, and the first is to focus on Ukrainian art. So we talk about Taras Shevchenko, we talk about Maria Primachenko, and we talk about some of the collections at Osredok. And this is, like I said, a little bit more of, it's art, it's education, but it doesn't have the undertone of the war running through it. And the other one is the Ukraine Land of the Brave. So this is, an immersive exhibition that channels the footage of all sorts of journalists, all sorts of people in Ukraine, their footage, their photographs, all woven together to help educate people about what's happened in the last, up to the first 7 months of the war. And now, sadly, we're at, almost a year of the war. So. Sorry, what was the beginning of that question?
Yeah, did you expect to get so much attention to this exhibition?
Yes and no. Like I was saying a little bit earlier about sort of this being a creative time. A lot of Canadians have also understood, the narrative before the war was that Ukrainians aren't different from Russians. Some people, where is Ukraine? They didn't know where this place was, where it existed, who these people were. But after this war, I think everyone knows that Ukrainians are different from Russian. Everyone understands that Ukrainians are a people who, deserves sovereignty, deserve to make their own choices for their future and how they want to govern themselves, who they want to be. So we've really seen that at Osredok in terms of our support from people who either want to contribute funds, they want to contribute their time covering the exhibition, they want to bring their families to learn something, people who might not have come through our doors before. This has brought a spotlight to Ukrainian art, Ukrainian culture, for better or for worse, but in a way that has been really great for Osredok and for building awareness for the general public.
What goals did you set for yourself before starting implementing this project, and what did you see as your main task?
I think my goal is always really just the same, like getting people excited about Ukraine, about being Ukrainian, and about arts and culture, because there's also a lot of people who we have so much overlap with. Culturally, artistically, and bringing those people in and giving them a place to express themselves or to learn something. So, for example, so many Ukrainians settled in lands that were also, neighbors with indigenous peoples, right? So there's these beadwork styles, and they have so much overlap, Ukrainian beadwork and indigenous beadwork. You have so many different of these embroidery styles and these embroideries, and you see them all across Europe. You see, it goes from Scandinavia all the way down to the Balkans, and you see so much of that overlap. And you see so much, any medium you want to talk about, oil painting. Ukrainians contributed to, Kazimir Malevich. He's, the founder of what they call, the Soviet avant-garde. But he's Ukrainian. He's the founder of the Ukrainian avant-garde. Like, these artists were working in Paris, they were working in Spain, they were working in all of these sort of major metropolitan centers. And one of the nice things to do with the artistic community is being able to bring being Ukrainian more into art in the same way that you're bringing other people into being Ukrainian, right?
Where did you get inspiration for your work, for your new project? Because you work a lot with heartbreaking photos, and you talk to a lot to newcomers. And so where did you get inspiration and motivation to keep working?
I think, so like one of the things I want to say about the immersive exhibition is that we had a team in Ukraine. We had a team, we had partners in Toronto. We had people working all over. So we had an Odessa team, a Kyiv team. We had creative people who were doing the bulk of the processing of so many of those images. So when we talk about sort of how hard it is, really a lot of that burden, a lot of that pain was falling so intimately onto Ukrainians. And this is something that we had to do, we had to deal with our timelines, with our deadlines, because a lot of these Ukrainians, they would call and say, you know, I'm sorry, we're gonna miss this deadline. And it was because there was no power in Kyiv. And so one of our tasks as, you know, as a creative team wasn't to, you know, pick and choose music and artworks. It was to find generators for a team to be able to do their work. Or it was to help someone get a ride back from the front to be able to do editing on the video content because he was busy working, or he, you know, they were constantly, the artworks that we worked with from the National Shevchenko Museum in Kyiv, they started off on the walls of that museum, and they returned to the crates that they were stored in 1941 when the Nazi front swept in through Ukraine. So they're currently in the exact same place. And all of that being a part of the process, you're right, it's stressful, it's traumatic, it influences the work, I think, in a way that you might not be able to tell if you aren't someone who's living through our times. Like if someone's going to look at this video 100 years from now, if they just look at the content of that exhibition, they might not see that. But at the same time, we're reflecting, you know, the things that we think are valuable, our own values. We're reflecting who we want to show. And so for me, Shevchenko is obviously very important because his work is inherently political. Like he has this idea of Ukrainians as a nation and of a people who are free from being serfs, being slaves. It runs through everything he did. And it's really important for us to show that to people who might not know that about him and might not know that about Ukrainians and Ukrainian art. It's also really important to show someone like Maria Primachenko, who, you know, she's not that well known in Western art, but she was the person who Picasso was inspired by, her artwork. She didn't have any formal training, but she was so deeply inspired by folk motifs. She was inspired by the paintings on, you know, village houses. She was inspired by pisanki, the line work, the bright colors. She was inspired by the geometric patterns in Ukrainian embroidery. All of these different things, which are so, like, there's such celebrations of being Ukrainian. There's such, and of just, you know, being alive. Like she's a person who's able to really take the joy in artwork and being expressive and contribute that to her art. And it's so nice to see that, and she deserves a bigger platform. Also, as someone who didn't come out of an academy, she is someone who hasn't been on the same level as people who traditionally sort of climbed the ladders, traditionally went through the different processes that got your art recognized as an artist, right? And then Oseradek's collections are really important to me and near and dear to my heart because Oseradek doesn't have an acquisitions budget. We have existed for, you know, 3/4 of a century with no budget. The reason that we have art, the reason that we are a repository is because of people like you. Like it's because of every Ukrainian contributed to build Oseradek, and Oseradek belongs to all of us. And so being able to just take a few of those pieces that people don't normally see and share that with people, it's so wonderful. And I really, really enjoy being able to be the one to be a part. Like I'm so lucky to be able to, you know, be a part of that process. So,
what do you feel and what emotions do you feel when you see people's enjoying your exhibitions and giving your positive feedback? How does it feel?
Yeah, of course, it's really wonderful, and that's why you do it, right? It's one of those things that. Again, the community feeds you, the artistic community, the Ukrainian community, the Canadian community who, you know, stands behind Oseradok, which we are, a heritage building in the center, in the heart of downtown Winnipeg, and having people come through, having people give you positive feedback is, the reason that you do it. People don't work in nonprofit work. People don't really work in the arts sector if they don't have sort of a passion for it and a calling for it, and that's really why I'm there.
Perfect. What new meaning has Ukrainian art acquired, and how this new meaning influence on people's life, on people's feelings?
Yeah, I really, that's hard for me to say. I think it's such a personal experience, right? And a lot of people have that when they interact with art, or especially contemporary art, where they say something to the effect of, like, I don't get it. But that's not the point of art, right? Art is supposed to elicit an emotion, and the emotion that you experience is what you get from it, right? Like, you're not supposed to, it's not a translation of the artist's words, otherwise the artist would have just said it to you. And hopefully for people interacting with Ukrainian art, they're getting something from it, where maybe they didn't get anything before, or maybe they're learning more about it. And I think this is sort of true about anything. Like, the more you learn about it, the more interesting it becomes. Maybe for some people, the more they learn about Ukrainian artworks, the more interesting it becomes. And in particular, and this was one of the themes that ran through sort of what we did at Oseradok, was trying to highlight diversity. Because, we sort of started off this conversation about who Ukrainians are. They're everyone, right? But Ukrainians are also, they can tend to have sort of like a stereotypical sort of depiction. If people don't know much about you, they might think, Ukrainians are sunflowers and vareniki or whatever. But Ukrainians are, as artists, they're everything. There's a place for sunflowers, and we love them, and they've become our symbol in this war, right? They're this beautiful and wonderful sunny symbol in our face. But Ukrainians are also incredibly contemporary and modern. They're working in graphic prints. They're on the cutting edge of sort of like computer and graphic artwork. They're also doing things that are, deeply rooted in folklore and craft and skill and handiwork. They're making ceramics. They're glazing with methods that have their roots in, pre-Christian times, and they're bringing it all together. And hopefully at Oseradok you're able to see a little bit of, just that diversity and that breadth and what it means to be Ukrainian.
Now let's talk about Ukrainian artists. What is the primary role of artists today, and how can they influence the war with their art, and what are their main goals?
I think that varies artist to artist. But one of the things that I would say that definitely comes out of people who I've spoken to in the cultural sector, for a lot of people it's to work on cultural diplomacy. And this goes back to, really highlighting that Ukrainians are their own people with their own identity. And what they're doing is they are using that identity, using their work to speak to other people who might not understand the conflict, but they might understand the world of art, of creativity, and again, of just being a person. For Oseradok, we were founded by a group of people who many of whom had left Ukraine in the 1918, 1920 Ukrainian National Republic kind of era, where Ukraine had, for the first time, the opportunity to be its own independent state. And under Simon Petlura, a lot of these people got sent out, and they were either composers or choral directors, they were dancers, they were other kind of creative people, and they were paid at a time when Petlura didn't have enough money to pay his army. And he made the same choice that Ukrainians are making today and that Churchill made in the Second World War, where you need to pay these people because what they're doing as cultural diplomats, as representatives of what it means to be Ukrainian, is incredibly valuable. And the artists that we have today who continue to make artwork, who continue to build relationships internationally, continue to express themselves and to, share their experience of the world, they're working as cultural diplomats, and they are people who are able to do so much, whether it's in sort of online and meming culture, whether it's in visual arts, whether it's in sort of more academic spheres. What they're doing is contributing invaluably to a war effort as individuals and what they can do when they're not on the front.
The first Ukrainians settled in Canada several centuries ago, and since then, Ukrainians are keeping to preserve Ukrainian culture here in Canada. Does it become more challenging for Ukrainians to preserve Ukrainian culture in Canada over the generation?
I would say no. And the reason I would say this is I think you have the same challenges you mean for an individual to preserve that culture? Okay, I was looking at this as through the light of someone who's working in the museum and conservation sector, but I still think I would say no insofar that, yes, it's harder to replicate what's happening in Ukraine because Ukraine is alive, like it's a living, breathing thing. And what I mean by that is the words that I use, for example, as someone whose ancestors came in the post-war era, are very funny to contemporary Ukrainians because they are a time capsule, right? They haven't necessarily evolved, and they haven't necessarily kept up with the way people are talking in like vernacular language in Ukraine. But what has happened for Ukrainians who live here is you don't become less Ukrainian, but you do become your own thing. You become Ukrainian Canadian. And I also think that that's kind of a beautiful thing, Maybe I'm just speaking because this is sort of my heritage, but I see so many wonderful things and wonderful fusions between Ukrainian culture and sort of Canadian culture mixed together. And you get the opportunity as someone who's in the museum sector to not only preserve sort of Ukrainian culture from Ukraine, but you get to preserve a whole other thing. And this has become our mandate, to preserve Ukrainian Canadian culture, which has become its own, right? It's become an incorporation of all these different things mixed together, and they create something unique, which for me is really satisfying and really, it's wonderful to see because it's an example of human creativity. And to that, I would say maybe looking at something like a Quebec culture, right? A lot of people who came from Quebec have their roots in France in, the 17th century. And they still speak French, and they speak a French that's very different from French in France.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they've made something entirely of their own, and that's also really lovely to see. And it's really fun to get to be adjacent to Quebec, adjacent to the Francophone community here in Manitoba, and get to watch that evolve too. And so as a Ukrainian, this is really kind of a fun thing that I get to be a part of as a Ukrainian Canadian. And for the people who are Ukrainian, who want to continue to be Ukrainian, I do understand that a lot of people say this to me when they come from Ukraine. They say, when I was in Ukraine, I didn't have to choose to be Ukrainian because everything I did was Ukrainian because I was in Ukraine. And here you have to make that choice, but I think it's still available to people. And I hope sort of in my role to make it more available or as available as possible to anyone who wants to access it.
Where do you want to see Ukrainian Canadian community in 10 years?
I really hope that, number one, and I think this is what everyone would say, is I hope that we will be celebrating the 10-year end of the war, end of Ukrainian victory. But I hope to see us as united as we have been. One of the things that has come out of, Zelensky or Poroshenko or any of the leaders who have really put their political differences aside, they've said, Putin tried to make Ukraine part of Russia, but he ended up making the whole world Ukrainian. And that there's no more politics left in the Ukrainian community because everyone has been united around this one cause. And I know that what's going to happen is after the end of this war, Ukrainians will go back to doing politics and, having different groups. And that's normal and that's good and that's how we should have, democracies. We should have these conversations, right? But I also hope that one of the legacies of this is that we as a community are able to, put aside sort of things that divide us and continue to work together, because the grassroots efforts that you've seen that have just sprung up out of nowhere and out of every sort of crevice you would have never imagined it. People have really come together, and I really hope that this is one of the legacies we take moving forward.
Just to wrap up, what is the main goal of Oseredok for this year, and can you tell us more about future projects?
I think the goal of Oseredok is always to expand and to bring more people in, right? By expand, I don't mean, we're never going to be a giant corporation or anything, but we really hope to constantly be changing, evolving, modernizing, professionalizing, and most importantly, opening our doors to bring more and more people in, and having people feel like it's the kind of place that they can take charge of projects and that they can also contribute anything that they have in terms of knowledge, skill set, even just enthusiasm, bring it into Osredok. I think that's always one of our goals. And future projects that are coming up, we do have a lot of different events that are coming. We really invite people to come and join us, whether they are sort of artistic or lecture series. I know the word lecture is very intimidating, but I encourage anyone who might be interested to come and join us because they're not that intimidating. We have lots of creative workshops. We have lots of opportunities to, come in and even just socialize. We have a lot of opportunities for people. Like right now, we have a lot of newcomers coming through our door. We have 6 days a week language classes of some kind. So if you are a newcomer and you're looking to learn English, this is something that our mandate has expanded, and we're now offering those kind of programming for people. And if you were a English speaker who's looking to learn Ukrainian, we have that as well. But in terms of sort of my sphere, which is, the exhibition sphere, we have always a new exhibition coming up, and we have always new partnership. And this year we have Rusalka Ukrainian Dance, who's going to be partnering with us. We're going to have a Ukrainian exhibition of works from Ukrainian artists, which is a sale to raise funds for Ukrainian artists and for students who are hoping to have their tuition paid in Ukraine and to allow them to continue to be, artists themselves. And we have a Nuit Blanche exhibition. We're going to have a pop-up. We're going to have an exhibition showing the works of an artist, or I don't know if I want to call him an artist, but a really famous Ukrainian Canadian who contributed to the circus and carnival and invention sphere. And I really hope that people from the Ukrainian community and also from the Canadian community come and join us.
Thank you, Alexandra. Thank you, Osredok, for doing a great job and for helping so many newcomers. And we are waiting to see your new project in your center.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for inviting me and for taking the time to learn more about us. And I wish you all the best with this series, and I'm really grateful that you're doing this for us.
Thank you. And thank you, our audience, for joining us today. We hope you enjoy it. If you like the episode, please like, share, and subscribe to see our upcoming episodes.